in space. Hey, how's it going there, space people? It's Today in Space. I'm Alex Orfanos, your science communicator, and it's the Apollo 50th, and there's been tons of Apollo 50th stuff. Apollo 11, been inundated by it. It's all good stuff, but I didn't want to just run through. We've kind of gone through the 50th. We've kind of touched on a lot of things I wanted to talk about. But one of the things that I really wanted to do, I posted about this on the Facebook page, but there's a 3-minute clip of the Apollo 11 launch, and I got so fired up listening on the ride home that I wanted to do it again here in the podcast and do kind of like a launch hangout like we've done with the SpaceX Falcon Heavy missions and even before that, where it's just us listening to a launch broadcast in this case and just talking about whatever comes to our mind. There's a lot in it, so let's just kind of get started here.
20 seconds and counting. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9.
And I
Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine run. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
It's fascinating just to hear what it sounded like back then. Just the difference in the broadcast, although it really hasn't changed that much. They were doing this, more or less for the first time. This was the big event. This was going to the moon. This could have all failed. All this tension that's happening right now, everything could have gone wrong. And the thing that really, it was the sounds. Listen to that. That beeping.
Shut down right on time.
Just the sound, the sizzle of the air, of the communications, the pause, the ping, all of that. This whole thing, so many people were focused on. They were focused on the actual mission. The whole world was looking at this because we were actually trying to go to the moon. I think I've said this before, but I don't think there was another moment in human history where so many people were focused around the world before the internet. When was there this complete focus of the whole world? I don't think there was. I think this was it, Apollo 11, when the whole world's concentration came at one point. And I don't know what it is about the audio. But it is just.
We confirm ignition and the thrust is go.
To me, I could feel the tension. Maybe it's because I know the context behind it, but there's something magical about just this 3-minute section here where.
11, this is Houston at 1 minute. Trajectory and guidance look good, and the stage is good. Over.
I mean,
35,000 feet per second.
It just doesn't get any better than this.
Cut off. Going velocity 35,570 feet per second. Altitude 177 nautical miles.
Another big thing about back then was so much of the early space program was relaying information like on the ground to make sure. Yeah, just to make sure that they were actually safe.
We'll pass that on, and it certainly looks like you're well on your way now.
It was such a manual process. We take for granted all of the things that we have today in a space program. We have people like SpaceX who are I said this before online, the gold standard of science communication right now. I don't see another launch broadcast. And if I'm wrong, please, Rocket Lab's been pretty interesting. There's so much room for improvement. That's really what I'm trying to say, because we're trying to spread love and spread science here. I'm not trying to hammer on the rest of the industry and NASA. What I'm trying to say is there is so much improvement that can happen here. There has been a stagnancy in the space industry for a long time. That's just how it's been. And now there isn't. Now there is this push to actually go out and explore the universe. People are willing to pay. We had this industry that was primed when we had the space shuttle. Space shuttle was going to be the trip up to orbit. All these companies were being formed to deliver to orbit, to create business in orbit. And then we got rid of it, and then there's no place for them to do anything. And these companies stayed around. They probably adjusted to the cost structure, even though the rockets were super expensive, all expendable rockets, because there really wasn't money or momentum to develop anything. And development of the SLS is happening. We're developing the space launch system, but it's taken a very long time. And we need to take advantage of the time we have now. I preach this so many times, and I'm not going to get bored of it until something changes. We need to focus on making sure that there's momentum behind here. And if there's any bad habits we have that, and I mean we as human beings trying to go into space, if we want to do that, we need to change our old habits that aren't helping us to travel and go further into space, and to develop quick enough that if we only have a 5-year window where people are interested in it, we need to make the best of those 5 years. And then hopefully with that momentum of what's happened, the 5 years after that are pulled because people are still interested in it. Since I've started this podcast, SpaceX has been around since then. It's been more than 5 years ago SpaceX started. They're about a decade in. We've been here for 5 years, and in those 5 years, things have changed. And there's still a momentum that's happening. It's even bigger. I mean, have you seen the Area 51 memes? I mean, it's all over the place. And the cool thing that's happening is the same kind of thing that happened with Mars One. Mars One was this colony program that was supposed to happen. It was supposed to be funded, and they were going to have a reality show. And it was based on basically the fact that it was going to buy cheaper rockets if they happened. It's no longer in existence anymore. And I remember I was on a radio show talking about this before on Gag Order Radio back in the day, and we were talking about it. Like, does Mars One matter? And it does matter because it actually got people talking. It got people saying, "Would you go to Mars? Like, would you drop everything and live on another planet and want to be like the first people, like the pilgrims that came to America? Do you want to be the people that are at Plymouth Rock, that are, the first people that came, that pioneered the next step?" And there's a lot of people who would do that. I think who are charged by that. And I was surprised learning about a bunch of people who were willing to do that. And so like the Area 51 stuff, yeah, it's hilarious. And there's no way that you're making it past that. It is a military base. It's not happening. You're going to hurt yourself. They're probably not going to even let you get that far. But regardless, because now I'm a Area 51 shill, regardless, it's starting the conversation. People are talking about it. Like it's water cooler talk. This is good. This is good for space communication and science communication. Yeah, it's ridiculous and it's silly, and no, it's not going to happen. You're not going to do a Naruto run and get away from bullets. Sorry, guys. That's not going to happen. But is it getting people to talk about it and think about aliens? And what would you do if they actually found aliens? What would you do? What would you really do? Like, that's what's great about the conversation. And so if we got to have a few Area 51 memes to boost the momentum, to keep us going through those 5-year periods, to get us through a program that actually matters, let's do it. That's what matters. And that's the only way I see it right now that we could do anything like Apollo 11 and have a program. The great thing is we've got people like SpaceX and Blue Origin and Virgin Orbit and all these companies, Rocket Lab, Stoffel Aerospace. All these companies are finding a way to keep themselves afloat and have their own missions. We don't need a giant country-backed thing to do this. We just need momentum, and we need people who are willing to do the day-to-day grunt work to keep it up and running. And so I hope you guys enjoyed that. We'll go to our next segment right now. As we close out this episode of Today in Space for the Apollo 50th, the 50th anniversary of the moon landing and what that did, I really want to thank the authors and the creators of Chasing the Moon, because having them as a resource to go back into the history and take a look at Apollo 50 and Apollo 11 and the influence of that and what the world was like before that, I've really had the chance to kind of think about how that relates to today's world. We've kind of touched on it in a few episodes before, but what JFK mentioned in the Rice University speech, the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Those other things that he was talking about, his whole thing, and the reason why I think he chose the space program to put his backing behind, other than the fact that they were going to beat the Russians, it was because it would help represent and help point people in the right direction to think about, how do we make humanity better? How do we make life for all humans on Earth better? I mean, from what I remember from history, what JFK was doing was trying to make life better for more people. At the very least, that was what his campaign was about, right? So, and his voice, really, I've been listening to some of his speeches and hearing him talk, and he was a fantastic speaker, and I think a rarity for what we're going to have for a president. He was a rarity in our entire political system. Now, he wasn't the most perfect person. He obviously had his faults, but he believed for something that was really important. And going back to my point, the other things, those things that we work on, are to make life better, to bring us that fantastic future. And the thing that I've seen a lot, and it's an old argument, but it's at least an argument, is why are we focusing on a space program when we should be focusing on stuff on Earth? And I think today's big thing, other than obviously making sure that people are safe and people are okay, the environment. The environment is a very big issue, and obviously we want to make sure that the world is sustainable for us to live on, so obviously there's that. But I think there's also an argument, and I was talking to somebody online about this, that maybe we should be focusing that money on the environment, and we should be focusing our efforts on that and not space. Well, the Environmental Protection Program was not even in existence. We had spent all our human history on Earth up until that point doing things how we were going and how we were doing. And then because we actually saw the Apollo 8 image of Earthrise, and we saw just how delicate and basically statistically impossible it is that we have this one planet that's in the middle of nothing, that at the right perspective you could put your thumb right over it and it disappears. That brought us perspective to how delicate this world really is. It brought us perspective to see what is actually in front of us, how special it is that we live on this planet with the atmosphere we have, at the right distance from the sun to create habitable life. We are so lucky. And it wasn't until we got off the planet to look back that we had the perspective that we need to take care of it. And so my argument for why should we spend money on the space program is because it helps us look forward to things that we don't have, that we didn't think were possible. It opens us up to the possibilities of what we can do and what we can achieve as the human species. And look, I would argue that we need all of it. I would argue that we need a space program, and we need to focus more on environmental issues, and we need to focus more on these things and make it easier for people to understand the perspective that you're putting forward. We all need to be more honest. If you're trying to fight that battle, if you're trying to make the world a better place, if you're trying to bring awareness to environmental issues, if you're trying to help anyone else understand your perspective or another perspective, then we need to really focus on how we're saying it and how we're communicating and how that is coming across. And I think if we take a step back and we look at the issue, it doesn't have to be binary. We can work on all of these things. We can do all these things. We just have to search for other ways to do it. Government funding is only one way. Look what's happened to NASA. NASA now is basically strapped on the fact that it needs government funding, so it has to basically, it's at the will of whatever the people we have in charge that we voted, they decide to allocate. That's it. But now we have this space program and this space race that's being funded by the private sector. And now you're seeing it's been around long enough that it's influencing all of the other space programs to create their own reusable spacecraft. Look at what's happening with Europe. They're now in a race against SpaceX to basically be able to recover rockets and do what they're doing, but do it better. That is what is amazing about finding another option, another way to make things happen. And how can we not go into space and see that life is as more fragile as it is? If we go out there and we see that life is not an easy thing to have, that it really does require these specific requirements for life to exist, that gives us a better understanding of the life that we have already that exists, and we know that it's fragile. That's what Earthrise did. That's what a space program did. And look at all the advances that have come from that. The fact, this right here, that I'm talking to you right now, across the world, across the internet, this is because we looked further, because we looked past what was possible at the time. That is why we need to focus on it and all of the other things. And it's going to be hard. It's not going to be easy. And if we're going to actually accomplish this stuff, and if you really are that passionate and you really want to make a change, you've got to ask yourself, what do you need to do to make yourself capable and worthy to do that? How are you going to have the discipline to keep the fight going when nobody wants to listen to you? Look, I've been doing this for 5 years, and sometimes it feels like I'm only gaining traction now, but I wouldn't be here doing this in the way that I'm doing it if I hadn't taken that time to work on it and make myself more disciplined and focused on what I wanted to say. Sometimes, I've been doing a lot of writing lately to make sure that I'm focusing on the words that I'm saying. This has been a fun episode because I'm doing it live right off the top of my head, but it's been a very, very good experience for me to really focus on my thoughts and focus on what I'm trying to say so that it comes across the way that I want it to come across. And that's really what I hope you take away from this is that not only with what we're trying to do here, it takes discipline and focus. What happened with the space program, it was a 10-year effort. That took extreme focus, and they totally dropped the ball many times. There were failures and times where they were moving too fast and things weren't safe enough, and people died. But they picked it up, and they fixed the problem, and they moved on to the point where they landed on the moon, changing the whole course of history. So you can only do that with discipline and focus. And things are going to get in your way, and things aren't going to work the way you want them to, but you pick yourself back up and you try it again. You look at what you did wrong and you fix it. It's all good. It's a long game. If you're really trying to make a difference, the space program was a long game. We didn't just someday decide we're going to go to the moon and then we landed there. It took 10 years and so many different things to actually happen in order for that to happen. So many different people that had to believe in it for it to work. And so many people that were unnamed that you probably haven't even heard of, even with the Apollo 50th, that were involved, that had such a major influence. So keep your head up, get out there, help spread love and spread science. And if we're trying to do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard, and because it is what we need to make ourselves have a fantastic future. If we're going to become multiplanetary, we need to understand now how to better be with an environment and live in an environment and live as human beings so that an environment develops that's good. Because if we go to another planet and do the same thing, then we haven't learned. So if we prep now, if we work on it now before we become interplanetary, we can at least have the skills we'll need later so that that next place will stay around for a very long time. So with that, I hope you have a great week. Happy Apollo 50th, celebration of one of the most ludicrous things that's ever happened and brought so many people so much hope. Something like this we need today, and we can only do that by staying disciplined and focused on what we want, because back when they started the Apollo program and the mission towards the moon, there wasn't a lot of hope, but they needed to think about what they could do to bring hope, and they succeeded. It changed the whole world. We went from the Cold War, the Red Scare, to thinking about, almost overnight, thinking about how fantastic it would be to live on other planets and that we're explorers and we're going out there. That happened overnight because of what they started 10 years before and all the hard work that went into one moment. That is possible. That's what Apollo 11 has shown us, that the impossible is possible, but it takes a lot of work, a lot of hardship, and a lot of work that you're not going to get credit for. So best of luck. Spread love, spread science. Have a great week. We'll be back next week. Next week, I get to visit the Space Center in Houston. So as long as everything goes right, I'll be there next weekend, and we'll talk about what we saw there. I'm so excited. I guess there's a replica of the actual command center. So we'll actually get to see with all the old tech, and we'll see what else we can do out there. If you have any ideas, or if you've been before and there's something I should check out, please let me know. You can check us out at, you can reach out, follow us on social media, Today in Space Pod on Instagram and Twitter, and on our Instagram page, both there and on AG3D Printing, at AG3D Printing on Instagram and Twitter. We have been 3D printing a bunch of stuff. If you haven't seen it already, please follow us. Basically, so that you can see the cool stuff that we're doing. We're doing a bunch of 3D printing on our AG3D printing site, which is what helps fund the podcast. So we help bring people's ideas into reality with 3D printing. I know how to design things if people need that. And we basically take an idea from being as close to, hey, I've got an idea, let's draw it on a napkin, to actually holding in your hands. And we do that with a lot of stuff here, and that's what we did this week. It was Apollo 50th, so we 3D printed a bunch of stuff. The Apollo capsule, the Saturn V. We also got a scanned image and a plate of Buzz Aldrin's footprint in the moon. That was my favorite thing for sure. So go check that out at Today in Space Pod on Instagram. And everything you can find about Today in Space is on todayinspace.net. That has all the links to everything. You can see all of our content there in all of its forms. And don't forget, we also have our YouTube page, Today in Space, and AG3D Printing. So if you want to check that out, learn more about 3D printing and about space, we're out there. Subscribe to us if you haven't already on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. They're the same thing. Spotify and Stitcher. You can find us there. Stay tuned and catch the next episode next week. So thank you for staying with us. I appreciate you for choosing the podcast and for listening and for staying this long. Have a great week. See you next time.